Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class, a production of iHeartRadio.
Hello and happy Friday. I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
And I'm Holly Fry.
We talked about the Insular Cases this week.
Yeah. Nice up kind of thing.
I know. I'm not sure how I wound up with this on my short list. I don't think it was the case that was before the Supreme Court last year. I think it had actually gone on my list prior to that happening, and it's such a big topic. It just took a while. And then once I did get into it, it was bigger than I had thought. I've researched a number of episodes of the show about various Supreme Court cases. And something that happened to me with this I don't remember happening with those other ones is that I wound up reading various articles in different law review journals that were between 50 and more than 100 pages long.
So much.
And so what I do when I'm doing research on the show is I go and either download or bookmark a ton of different papers. And I kept seeing these ones that were about the Insular Cases, and I was like, hey, these look great, these look great, these look great. And then I would actually get into them to do the reviewing part, and I was like, okay, now this is 100 more pages, and this is 50 more pages, and this is 97 more pages. There's no possible way I can read all of this in prep for this thing. And so much about law is argument that you will find different people making slightly different nuances about these. So the way they are most often described is that they set up this idea of incorporated and unincorporated territories, and only fundamental constitutional rights apply in the unincorporated territories and maybe not others. But I found a couple of people that were building these arguments that were it's not exactly that. It's the slightly different thing. And I was like, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't think
I would not enjoy that job.
Yeah, I was like, I can't encapsulate what it is that you're arguing about, the slightly different interpretation of all of this. Yeah.
It's hard for me to square. We talked about it a little bit during one of our breaks. This idea of kind of bickering over semantics being the thing that determines the fate of people.
Yeah.
That's very hard for me to square with.
Right. And one of the things that was frustrating about this episode is there have been various Supreme Court decisions that have come out over the last few years that are similarly 5-4 decisions, and people who are analyzing this decision are there's not actually a constitutional basis for this thing that they've just said. They've kind of made it up. And I'm looking at the Insular Cases, and I'm like, this is the same thing.
Yeah.
It's a 5-4 decision where they just kind of made up a justification to exclude people from fully being part of the United States because they were considered to be too racially different. I'm not saying any of those places wanted to be part of the United States in the first place, but specifically being well, you'll still be our territory, but you don't actually get all the rights because we think you are,
don't
quote,
want you to have them.
Savages. Yeah. Hated that.
Yeah.
I read one paper that argued that this idea of preventing incorporation for bigoted reasons, it was making an argument that you can actually see sort of the precursors to this in the process of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints trying to establish a home in Utah, and seeing similarly prejudicial treatment of that. And I was like, this feels like a whole other thing. And
right.
This episode is already 6,000 words long. If we got into this whole Utah situation, that was going to be at least another 10 minutes. So maybe that's another thing that at some point in the future might be its own episode.
Maybe. I'm going to make a statement that's ridiculous.
Okay.
I could not be a Supreme Court justice.
No.
I mean, for the obvious reasons of I don't have a law degree, have never been
Mhm.
involved in such. The idea, like, I always, and this is possibly going to display a level of emotional immaturity on my part, but I'm always sort of marveling when you see, like, justices that sit on either side of the political spectrum and they're, like, hanging out and buddy-buddy, which
Mhm.
is not to say that people cannot come together if they so choose, but I can't imagine being part of a governing body where you're making really decisions with so much gravity,
Mhm.
and in some cases, writing very, very, passionate dissents and disagreements with one another,
Mhm.
and then being palsy, because to
Yeah.
me, like, I have a problem that I am working on in therapy where, like, if I don't like someone, playing nice with them feels like I'm lying.
Okay,
You
sure.
know what I mean? Where I'm like,
Yeah.
and I know that's emotionally immature on some level. We have to be adult enough to get along with other people, but, like, I tend to just ignore people I don't like after a while, which is not always great.
Yeah.
But so, like, the idea of, like, hey, we just decided that some people are gonna get really hurt, but I disagreed. I wrote my thing. Do you want to get lunch? I would be like, I would lose my mind.
Um, a friend of mine, decided to return to school and to get a law degree a few years ago. And one of the things that he talked about was that the way you have to learn how to think about things kind of breaks your mind,
Yeah.
and you there's stuff you really can't talk about with the people in your life because it sounds monstrous.
Right.
And, like, that's really similar. Um, like, I remember there was one day we were all gonna play D&D, and the kid he and his spouse came walking down the steps, and, he was talking, and she was clearly outraged, and they had been having a conversation in the car about something that was legally related, and it was that kind of thing where, like, the way to think about it from a law perspective, it just infuriates anybody who is not looking at it from that angle.
Right.
And I was like, "I don't think I could do that."
I
Uh,
couldn't either. And the thing is, like, this is kind of goes back to that idea of, like, I couldn't square with that, is that it's not just the theoretical way that you look at it from that dispassionate perspective,
uh-huh.
because there are consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
I struggle with.
Yeah. I agree with that. Um, so one point I wanted to make is that in a lot of sort of general overviews of the insular cases, people make this point that with one exception, these are all the same justices who were involved in Plessy versus Ferguson. So that's the one that decided that racial segregation was constitutional as long as those separate facilities were also equal. So we've done just a whole episode on that. It's come up extensively on the show before. Harlan, who wrote one of the dissents that we read in one of the insular cases, was like the lone dissenter in Plessy versus Ferguson, and a lot of people point that out. They're like, it is not surprising that this was all really racist. These are the same people
Mhm.
that decided in Plessy versus Ferguson. Something that none of them mention is that this is the exact same court that issued the decision in a case called United States versus Wong Kim Ark. And that case decided that children born in the United States to Chinese immigrants were citizens at birth. This was a time Chinese Exclusion Act and other immigration laws made it illegal for immigrants from China to become citizens. But if Chinese immigrants had children in the United States, those children were citizens at birth. Um, that's the exact same court decided that. Sometimes people imagine John M. Harlan as being like racially really progressive because, in addition to Plessy versus Ferguson, he had several dissents that were on the subject of race that were like, the thing you're doing is terrible and
Right.
it's going to become notorious in the future. In this case, he dissented against the idea that like Chinese immigrants, children born in the U.S. should be citizens. So you can totally look at all this court's many decisions and see patterns. But it's a little weird to me that people point to Plessy a whole lot and just sort of don't mention the probably not quite as well known United States versus Wong Kim arc.
Yeah. And now we need cozy things.
Yeah. We intentionally recorded this episode first in our recording session today because of the 2 episodes we're recording. It is the more angering.
The other one's pretty light.
The other one's pretty fun. So in just a second, you'll get to hear about that.
Dun dun. Talked about bubbles.
We did. A lot of bubbles.
So first thing I want to address, because you asked, and it was a thing that I, while doing the research, was like, hold on a minute.
Mm-hmm.
You will often find in various places, both from manufacturers that describe all the different kinds of bubbling waters, and more scientific sources, that sparkling water is what comes from the earth.
Mm-hmm.
But we have flavored sparkling waters, and that was really a head scratcher for me. And I was like, I don't understand how this works. And I'm sure there is like some trade publication that explains it, which I could not find. But what I did find was the FDA rule around it.
Oh, okay.
So the Food and Drug Administration says natural flavors in sparkling water can be created using natural ingredients from essential oils, extracts, distillates, or other products derived from fruits, vegetables, spices, herbs, barks, roots, and other organic substances.
All right.
I.e., you couldn't put a syrup in it, but you could put like an oil extracted from an orange rind into it.
Okay.
And that's the rule, that it still stays. It gets tricky because they use that word natural a lot, which does not have a legal definition in terms of food. It's why a lot of packaging says natural flavorings. And it's like, that is meaningless words. You may as well just go like blibbity blobbity bloop. Like, it doesn't have any meaning. But that is why you can have, because, you know, nothing comes out of a spring tasting like watermelon. I wish.
I don't.
No, you don't. What is your, what's your sparkling water flavor of choice?
So we have a soda stream. This is not sponsored. We have a soda stream at home. So I make sparkling water with tap water that I've run through a water filter. And I will, I'll put like one of many flavors of shrub in there. If you're not familiar with that term, a shrub is like a vinegary, sweet syrup that's got some flavor. Or sparkling water, a couple shots of bitters. That's a favorite thing to do. In terms of purchase stuff, Spindrift raspberry lime is my favorite.
Oh. I have been using, if anyone listens to Criminalia, they know this. Lately, I have been using apricot sparkling water in cocktails.
Fun.
Delicious. With a little rose. Delicious. But I am training myself to like sparkling water because I do not naturally. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I have an assortment of bitters. So really, like, whatever I'm in the mood for, I will make sparkling water with a little bitters in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Meh. It was funny that you mentioned a soda stream because I forget which source I used. I think there's a book called Fizz, and it might have been in there, which is about the history of carbonated beverages. And it kind of compares Nuth's device to like the original soda stream for 18th century water drinkers.
Yeah. I think we got it we either got it as a wedding present, or we had gotten 2 of something from our wedding registry, and we returned the second one and used it to buy a soda stream.
Smart. I will say, while we're talking about sparkling waters, that it breaks my heart that it's pronounced LaCroix and not LaCroix, according to the company, because it just sounds prettier my way.
I know you hate saying it that way.
I hate it.
Yeah.
There were some interesting stories that were associated with this that would have been kind of a wild goose chase and not necessarily germane. One of them is a really good bickering thing, and one of them is a cool thing, and another thing is a scandal. So the first thing is, one of Priestley's apparatuses with the pig bladder, was actually used by Captain Cook on his second voyage because they were trying to test the value of CO2 impregnated water as a preventative of scurvy. Guess what doesn't work? But
it'll work if you put some citrus in
it. Yeah. But that wasn't happening. So that Priestley apparatus with the bladder, we mentioned that Newth in particular was like, hey, this tastes like urine. And so did a lot of other people. And Priestley got really mad about it.
Oh, yeah?
And wrote a lot of very angry stuff about it. Because he was angry on multiple levels, including the implication that he couldn't tell the difference between water that tasted like urine and water that didn't.
I can see how that would be frustrating.
Right. And he was like, I have had so many of my colleagues taste this. None of us tasted this note of urine you're talking about. You are clearly biased. And then he made the accusation that one of Newth's assistants must have peed in the apparatus.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
It's pretty funny. He talks about his friends having very delicate sensibilities, so they would have noticed, which is not really the most complimentary thing to say about someone.
Right.
But it is pretty funny that they had this whole argument. And I mean, to Priestley's credit, he did eventually be like, yeah, that's actually better than mine. I get it. It is cleaner. It creates a sealed, thing instead of mine, which still has animal matter involved. And, the taking out of the bottle that you then have to hold closed with your finger to shake it, like obviously not as sterile as something you can seal connector to connector.
Right.
I just love this idea that he got so mad. He was writing all of these op-eds that were like, my water doesn't taste like pee. It made me laugh and laugh. I don't think you ever watched the show Home Movies, which I'm sure I've invoked on the show before. It is, long-term precursor to Bob's Burgers with some other shows in the middle. But there was a very funny episode where, to me, one of the coach, played by John Benjamin, Coach McGurk, who I love forever, took some of the kids camping, and one of the kids peed in his canteen as a practical joke. And then when he drank it and said it tastes like pee, they were like, how do you know what pee tastes like? That's what I thought of while reading all of this back and forth about it tasting like pee. Okay, so the somewhat scandalous bit, and this is horrifying, but is also, it worked out. So before I go into this, it is not going to any place scary or frightening in terms of inappropriate sexual behavior.
Okay.
When Colette was still a kid, the family had a friend who was her tutor. She was 12 at the time, and he fell in love with her.
Oh, dear.
And he said he would like to marry her when she was of age. Like, he basically wanted to say, like, hey, when she turns 18, I would like to be her fiance. And they were like, that's weird, but we have some years to think about this. But then they ran away together.
Oh, no.
According to all accounts, he was going to put her in a convent school and then return for her when she became legal age, and that nothing inappropriate ever happened. But whether or not that was the case, Schweppe was like, you kidnapped my kid.
Sure.
And they got Colette back, like, very quickly, like, in a few days. And even though it seems like the family kind of made up with this dude, at least superficially, he still had to answer for it in a court of law. And he did have what to me seems like a pretty mild sentencing. I think, like, he couldn't live in Geneva, and there was something else, but it was pretty minor. It wasn't like there was no imprisonment. There was no, but he was not the person that Colette married, by the way.
Yeah. Good.
He vanished from their lives, it seems. But it was one of those things where one of the histories I was reading, I think it's the one that was written in 1983, like kind of goes down this side path of Colette's weird elopement and how this strange friend of the family was just in love with her. And it also made me think, as they get to the point where it's like, when she is 14, though, she's essentially kind of doing the work of an adult. And I'm like, there are a lot of weird boundary issues here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was kind of fascinating. It is very sweet that she and her father were very, very close and, did want to work together. And she did not, I was not able to find any primary sources that are like in her voice. But based on the fact that she and her husband chose to stay near her father and they still spent a lot of time together, it doesn't seem like she was ever resentful of any of that. But who knows? People hang on to things without talking about them. But anyway, I found this all very fascinating. The whole Jakob Schweppe story and how he sometimes made what seemed like not great agreements, like that whole, like, you can tell me that I have to close the London office and that none of my receipts will be paid after that, other than like getting back to Geneva. That seems like such a weird clause to have in a contract.
Yeah.
And it almost makes it seem like those two dudes always wanted to cut him out of the business. Depending on what source you read, it does sort of sound like Nicholas Paul did want to take over the business, but we're getting it all filtered through various lenses, and there isn't a ton of documentation. There's like one, Gosse kept a pretty detailed set of notes for a while and then no more. And so we're piecing some of it together. But I love bubbles, so thanks, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Priestley, Newth, Schweppe. I should mention, we didn't talk about it in the episode, but he is germane to our show because we've talked about him before. Antoine Lavoisier was also working on this, and he's one of the people for whom the letters were flying back and forth. But yeah, they were all figuring it out one at a time together, debating over whether it tasted like urine. If this is your weekend coming up, we hope that you raise a glass of whatever bubbly beverage you like, or a non-carbonated beverage if that's your preference, and that you just get some time to hang and relax, and that everything goes as smoothly as possible. If you don't have time off, I still hope you drink something delicious and that you still find a minute or two just for you. We will be right back here tomorrow with a classic episode, and then on Monday with something brand new.
Stuff You Missed in History Class is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.